I'd like to call to order our commissioner briefing this afternoon. Thank you for joining us, commissioners. Are there any items on this evening's agenda that we need to discuss? All right, there being none, we will go ahead and move into our first staff update. We have a Helene and preparedness plan update with Kevin Madsen and Heather Parkinson. Oh, Max Tainter instead. Apologize, Max. I was just looking at what was on my.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Max and I are here today to talk about the Helene Recovery Plan and the Preparedness Action Plan. We'll go through a number of updates on our active projects and share a little bit of how the process looks moving forward for 2026 and our quarterly updates. Okay, so our agenda for today is to share a little bit of background on our program, how the recovery plan is progressing forward, and then really focusing in on the updates by the focus area. All the products have been tied to different focus areas, from community health to public safety. And then, of course, our preparedness action plan falls within the public safety component as a project within the recovery plan, and that's where Max is going to take over and give an update on that project. And then, of course, foundational will hit our grant finances, our other programs, our partnerships in the community as well, with different groups, and then what next steps look like. As y'all are aware, our Helene Recovery Office is currently staffed with 2 project managers and a business analyst. So we are actively working on projects. The team has been gathering the data for today's presentation and handling that project management in coordination with our lead departments. As a reminder, 11 lead departments are focused on these projects, in addition to the different efforts out in the community that fall outside of the recovery plan. With regards to funding streams, we continue to do grant research on grants from the Community Development Block Grant, Disaster Recovery, our Hazard Mitigation Grant Program, and other grants that become available through our different partners, such as DEQ, Department of Environmental Quality, on the Flood Resiliency Blueprint. Of course, then we're coordinating with our state and local partners to make sure we have alignment on these projects and these efforts throughout the process. And then, of course, meeting internally with our county departments on those efforts as well, providing either a lead effort on project management for the recovery or for a collaborative and supporting role in the departments. And then, of course, when it comes to the Board of Commissioners, we are doing quarterly updates. This is the first of 4 for this year. We'll then come again in June for the next update, sharing progress on these efforts as we move forward. And one of the things when we talk about the briefings is we're shifting from the recovery support function focus, which is what most of 2025 was focused on when we came to recovery briefings, very much now focused on the actual recovery plan as that framework tool for our different efforts throughout all of our county departments. And once again, those focus areas are listed above. Each project has assigned a focus area based on department, based on the community served, and those impacts as well. With that being said, the recovery plan is a component of our large jurisdiction, so we are actually working and meeting with our municipal partners. As we're going through this process, we're actually meeting with Town of Woodfin later this week, and have already met with a number of municipalities on these efforts. Once again, our county-specific focus is 31 projects of the 114 total in the recovery plan. The county projects, a couple just highlight real quick, is they incorporate a number of sub-projects. So that 31 equates to 138 at present, and that will expand and contract based on our efforts and funding streams. So as we go through the slides today, each focus area will have a title slide and then the different components, different projects within that focus area. We have bolded everything that is currently actively funded or in progress. So we're going to highlight those for today, but wanted to show that there's a number of projects that we may not touch on today that are awaiting funding or some of the planning efforts to commence. The Community Memory Project, our cultural asset restoration, and the mental health training and support are the 3 that we're going to focus on for community health. The Community Memory Project is a completed project that was led by our library team about gathering information and data for our community members. 300 plus residents provided data and information on come hell or high water. And that program was an opportunity for us to capture and historically document our impacts throughout Buncombe County. It is part of the Special Collections Division of the library. It is something that is accessible and being coordinated with IT on ensuring everyone has availability to access those files and able to use them in the future for other education opportunities as well. One key highlight is the library is looking at future additions. When we look at anniversaries, whether that's 5 years or 10 years out, they'll look at those in the coming years to build that even further. In addition to the Community Memory Project in Community Health, we have cultural asset restoration. And when we talk about cultural asset restoration, that is our libraries, our parks, a lot of our community centers, as far as looking at expanding and repairing post-Helene. Owen Park is a prime example of that. That park was heavily devastated during Helene. We've been working with the Swannanoa area on providing resources. There's actually a design meeting coming up in the coming weeks with that group. And we also have multiple other projects beyond Owen Park that are in the design and engineering phase of looking at next steps. Once again, that public input session is on 3:30. And one thing about Owen Park to keep in mind is when we like to talk about funding streams, it is a puzzle of different funding streams. So we have FEMA public assistance that's feeding into that project. We also have hazard mitigation grant program, which is a funding stream through North Carolina Emergency Management, with FEMA funds that are being applied to that, and we're looking at additional grant sources as well. So we're looking at all possible opportunities to restore the park, mitigate for future risk, and possibly enhance capabilities of that park as well. In addition to Owen, another one to highlight is the Parks Trust Fund that we applied for recently, looking at 3 ADA compliance boat ramps along the French Broad River. So there's a number of activities that are falling within this cultural asset restoration project that we want to highlight, and that, of course, is more of a long-term project, at least 3 to 5 years to look at completion of this one. Mental health training and support, highlighting a recent grant award, is that our team members at Health and Human Services received a $100,000 grant from the Community Foundation towards this effort. They're looking at designing partner engagement strategies, collaborating with our community organizations, and then looking at developing a training program for community health support. So we're building on this program. We've had recent funding come together for it in the early stages, but we're seeing that progress come through on this project as well. Moving into the economic development category, hitting very briefly on our commercial district revitalization, More Than a Job program, which used to be STEP, and then of course our public art efforts as well. With commercial district revitalization, a lot of this is going to be funded by our external funding streams with grants, the recent $980,000 that we got for the sidewalks for Swannanoa, but we're also putting a number of our our community development block grant disaster recovery applications related to this. There's a component of that grant program for commercial revitalization and for infrastructure. So a lot of those efforts and grant applications are applying to this project with a strong focus on sidewalks in the Swannanoa area, but a lot of our communities where the need arises on that commercial district revitalization. A lot of it is in alignment with North Carolina DCR, and then looking at coordinating with our economic development team on where we can make these grants match up with existing efforts for long-term planning.
Reading the original NC Commerce guidance on this bucket of funding, and there was a cap per award. Is that still the case?
It is, I'll have to look at the exact number, but there is a cap on all the awards within CDBG-DR, different cap for commercial district and a different one for infrastructure.
And whatever that number is it per county, per project? Per project.
Yeah.
So like Swannanoa could be a project?
It could be sidewalks for Swannanoa or Barnersville, and I'm trying to think if we've got, actually, if you'll permit me to ask Tyler here real quick, or Eleanor, do we know the exact number for the cap?
10 million.
10 million, thank you. Okay. So that gives us insight on what that cap is there. For instance, sidewalks in Swannanoa, I think we're looking at about a 9.8 on a project there.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
Of course. Any other questions on commercial district revitalization? Okay. Moving into a program that's being led by Health and Human Services in partnership with the state, is the More Than a Job program. They're currently deploying that program. There's actually a website link at the bottom of this slide deck for that, and it's in partnership with Asheville Buncombe Technical Community College, looking at providing job force training for participants in the SNAP program. So that is an active program, a good resource for our community members, and HHS is leading that effort. And it really helps with financial guidance, like I said, workforce development, all the materials that they need, but then also helping develop documents for them, resumes, cover letters, through the different programs. So once again, More Than a Job. If you look at it in the recovery plan, it used to be STEP for that program. And then, of course, public art. Another component we're looking at for this category is our efforts underway. We have 3 projects on our public art, and they're not always tied specifically to a Helene art project, but it's more reinforcing our public art for one mural on Pack Library. We also have an effort at King Creek, which is a really impressive effort with Echoes of the Forest. And that King Creek actually is using timber from Helene for the project itself. If I remember correctly, I think it's some bears playing soccer. So it'll be really nice, and Allison will have an opening session with that as well. Hitting just one quick point on energy and the environment. One of the things we want to talk about here is our open space property. This is when we're going through our hazard mitigation grant program. We recently had the award for 47 parcels from our Group 1 and Group 2 properties for buyouts, acquisitions under the HMGP funds in partnership with North Carolina Emergency Management, looking at how we address those properties in the long run. Since they will be green space once they're acquired, the property will be demolition and restored to that natural setting to address flood risk or other risk factors depending on where the property is located. So we're working on with our different departments on how we address that, what we can look at for options. If there's contiguous properties for a greenway project, looking at the long-term maintenance associated with that as well. So that effort is underway as North Carolina Emergency Management has our project coordinator working with our community members in that Group 1 and Group 2. So open space property will of course expand as our Group 3, Group 4, so on and so forth are going through the acquisition process and looking at that property being bought out by the county with the state funds.
Kevin, just one question on that. So in the deeds, are y'all ensuring that those open space, natural resource conservation, floodplain management, recreation and ag use, that all that's included within the deeds?
We have very good guidance from the federal government on how that property can be used. So the deed restrictions will be using the language on that front. So it'll be in compliance with any property purchased through HMGP. But it'll indicate on the parcel that it can only be used for certain things. So no concrete, no like sidewalks, but it'll have all the restrictions associated with that property in compliance with the federal funding associated with it. But we could put items on there such as a structure with 4 open walls, sidewalks with, possibly mulching or limited gravel. So there are some things that we're navigating through on that process where we could look at light development, or if it would go to agriculture or to a community group to do the maintenance on it. All those things are being navigated in this process right now. But the deed restrictions will be, like I said, in perpetuity there as far as what can and can't be built on the property.
I just know I was speaking with one of the Haywood County Commissioners, and they ran it because of however their deeds were done in the past, it limited, right, like the ag use. And so even though it was, so that's why I was curious with us saying that, we wanted the ability to do that on some, ensuring that we get that language in there and correct here on the front end will make a difference.
We had this issue when we had Orchard Park, as we were trying to navigate what we can put on Orchard Park. And we talked to Steve McGugan about this specific project, and he mentioned that the deeds were almost standardized to HMGP, but we can come back to them for waivers. As we figure out what we want to do on that property, we can approach NCCM and come up with what that plan is, but we need a plan. So they're not gonna give us an wide open deed, non-restricted deed. But we can come back with them with a plan, and then they can give us the waivers that we need to make that effective on that parcel.
Thank you, Avril.
Which is what we did with Orchard Park. We went back to them with our plan, and then they tell us yes or no, we can put this on that parcel.
Okay.
Any other questions on open space property? Okay. So next.
I did just have one
Oh,
question.
yeah, of course.
Before we go on to that, it's not on your list, but I was curious with the stream bank stabilization, because I was hearing from some community members that potentially like still need funding like for the engineering, so do you know if that's the case?
So we did have a grant application in for the STRAP funding stream. I want to say it's, I don't have the exact number in front of me, but we did recently put an application in, and we partnered with City of Asheville on that process. I'm not sure where that is as far as the award for that program, but we are looking at that, and we also have the emergency watershed protection funding streams that are out there. Trying to think if there's any other grants that we've applied for, but we do have that on the radar. And once again, tomorrow we are meeting with Department of Environmental Quality for their flood resiliency blueprint to see if that possibly is a grant funding stream we can tap into for this as well.
So do we have all the streams that we need to be able to move forward with the projects, or do we still have a big gap that's limiting projects? That's what I'm trying to figure out with that.
We have identified possible other opportunities. Sorry, April. There are still, we're still learning of new opportunities as we're going through. One actually this morning that got brought to our attention that we're looking into as well. So I think as time progresses, we're identifying other possible opportunities to look at stabilization efforts.
Okay.
And then, of course, some of the properties that are in the acquisition program, that would then lead to possible efforts on that front as well. So if they're in a known area for stabilization efforts, that's one of the key things we would just keep on the agenda for property discussion as they're looking at demolition and removing of infrastructure on the property as well. Yeah, of course. So on growth and development, one of the key things here is you'll notice that we've got several that are highlighted. I know we've got a conversation later today that is going to be brought up about our Ferry Road and Cox Avenue projects. So I didn't want to go into the conversation today knowing that we're going to have another presentation later on. That is all tied to affordable housing and those efforts with that funding stream and the application process. With regards to the Swannanoa Small Area and Resiliency Plan, same thing. I know Jillian and Shannon have recently had a presentation on that, so not going into the weeds on that, but those are all very active projects and a lot of efforts are going into those. So wanted to make a note of that for today's slides. The one that I do want to focus on, though, is talking about home repair. Since we have a number of our Buncombe County community members that are engaged in the Renew NC program with that funding stream from the Community Development Block Grant, that is where the funding stream is available and where our community members can get those resources. Actually, I believe there is an event as we speak right now that's in Swannanoa for, I think, the second home that's gone through reconstruction, where a community member is getting the keys to that property today. So those efforts are very much underway, and we're seeing that progress. At present, we have 26 homeowners that have signed agreements for reconstruction, 10 in the rehab, and then 5 for full replacement. And of course, we expect that number to grow as we move forward. We account for roughly a third of all the applications here in Buncombe County under that Renew NC program. And with that being said, you can see rough timelines. So the expectations for our community members, it's a little over 2 months for a rehab, just shy of 3 months for a replacement, and then a full reconstruction is roughly half a year. And that's kind of what we think as far as timelines on these different projects. And hopefully, we're going to see that continue to grow as the agreements are getting signed and our community members are getting that resource served. Any questions about Renew NC or that program?
So with all that in mind, is there a public timeline that Renew believes they'll be able to get through all of these applications?
I'm trying to look, I've got their slides here. I don't know if they've given a full timeline on that right now. The program for single home housing is $807 million, so it's a very large, complex project. So the entire process itself is about 7,500 properties or applications that have gone into the program. I think it's just going to depend on contractor availability, schedules aligning with our community members. So a number of factors contribute to those timelines. I do think we are seeing progress forward. They closed the application window earlier this year. They're collecting all of their documents for the homeowners, and that effort should be complete by April 1st. So once all those documents are in, it seems like it will be less data collection and more agreement signing. And once they go to that route, it's going to be scheduling with contractors. So I think by the time we come back in June, we'll have a better picture of what that timeline may look like.
And then just for understanding of process, all home repairs are going through Renew NC, aside from whatever the city of Asheville may do since they have their own funding block?
For right now, for the majority of Buncombe County, this is a program that we've been had encouraged our community members to sign up for. There are additional resources with our long-term recovery group and other programs that exist out there. But this is one that is being funded through that community development block grant that the state was awarded. The city of Asheville does have their own DR funds. I can't speak to the focus area on those, but I know this is a good program that we've been leveraging.
Thank you.
Of course. Okay, one of the key things here is our public safety. You'll notice this actually has 2 slides, so there's a lot of our efforts in the recovery plan that fall within the public safety category. Instead of hitting all the different components we're working on, I just wanted to highlight a couple of the efforts that are currently underway. But a lot of these have some forward momentum associated with them. So we're going to talk about community organization support, our landslide mitigation project, resiliency hubs, and then of course Max is going to talk about the preparedness action plan. With regards to community organization support, we have a number of efforts that are currently underway that we're working with our community partners on. And really it's focused on not just our recovery efforts, but this project is more on enhancing our preparedness, our capabilities moving forward if we were to have another disaster in the future, building that partnership with what we call a COAD, Community Organizations Active in Disasters. There's an internal county team that has been building out the charter for this, the initial collaboration, what that structure looks like. So we increase that capability for future events that may be impacting our community. The planning team is also identifying the roles and responsibilities from the county's perspective and our community organizations and our community groups. This is a complementary effort to the long-term recovery group. So the long-term recovery group is focused on those longer-term efforts and issues associated with Helene damages, recovery, other components where they can address unmet needs. The COAD is focused on whatever disaster may happen tomorrow and how we can provide a timely resource. And that is something that we're in the planning stages and that we'll expect to progress moving forward over the coming months as well.
Kevin, how is this different from a VOAD? I'm familiar with those. Is this just a new terminology? Sounds very similar.
Very similar to a VOAD. So in North Carolina at the state level, we do have a VOAD, a Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. The COAD opens a little bit more opportunity for other groups that aren't necessarily in the voluntary component. So usually a VOAD is private nonprofits. You don't really see business partners or other community organizations that fall within that category. The COAD gives the ability to bring in different groups. So it's more of a comprehensive approach to ensure that we can collaborate with as many partners as possible. Yeah, of course. Landslide mitigation, I know this is one that we've talked about quite a bit, but just giving an update. With regards to the landslide mitigation project, we are currently in the assessment phase of looking at mitigation efforts for Grovemont. Our team has been out after the initial field reconnaissance and the data gathering by our contractor. We are also looking at Garen Creek. We've had that award, we're developing our proposal with the contractor that was selected based on the RFQs. And I'm also happy to announce, effective today, the RFQ should be posted for all remaining landslides. So that is where we're at. All are currently in the active process instead of pending, where we had the remaining slides under Grovemont and Garen Creek. We're waiting for that RFQ, which should be going out today.
Will the RFQ be for all of those, or each of those will be an individual RFQ?
So we decided to look at it as a more holistic approach. So the RFQ will encompass all remaining landslides, and we'll be working with our proposals or contractors that come in and determining what timelines would look like for that. making sure that they have the ability and the effort to do that and the capability. But it will be one singular approach for the RFQ, allowing us to be more efficient in timing on that next step. I will also just highlight that we do have funding for all of these under phase one, which is for that assessment and engineering. And that was given to us by FEMA under the Public Assistance Program. That is, the small products, anything under $1 million, were already provided to the county. If it was over $1 million, the state of North Carolina has agreed to do funding up to 75% once the contract is accepted. So Guerin Creek would be one that would fall into that category. But all of that money has been obligated by the federal government, and we'll be working with the state on next steps of that process. And once again, we've already received $600,000 from NCEM for Grovemont. That money came through at the end of last year. And we are about 20% through the invoice process for them so far. With regards to activities completed, they've already done field reconnaissance. They've completed the LIDAR specific to the Grovemont area. They've identified all of the initiation zones and have been working with us on looking at what next steps look like. So they'll start working on engineering design probably in the next 3 to 4 weeks, and then we'll be able to have a good information on what the recommendations are and what next steps will look like. And then we would be working with our federal and state partners on seeking seeking funding to look at a phase 2 component for that. Guerin Creek, and once again, the RFQ review has been completed. We're working with the contractor on scoping right now to get that built out, have a proposal, and we'll be, of course, coming to y'all in a future meeting for that process as well. And I'm trying to think, got a report this morning from our contractor on Grovemont. I think everything, we really kind of hit on the slide there, but it is something where they are actively working with us and coordinating on those efforts. We do get very frequent updates from them as we're progressing forward. With regards to resiliency hubs, we are looking at all the capabilities, all the components with that. Once again, this is that aspect where we have a central location for a community after an event or even prior to an event where it's a public facility with different resources and capabilities. Looking at wind hardening, power systems, renewable energy sources. All of those have been looked at as far as capable programs, and we've applied for the hazard mitigation program for generators, renewable energy resources, wind hardening projects. So all those grants are currently active and sitting with the state, and they'll be submitting those to our federal partners for review in the coming months. We've also been working with our community partners and attended an event at the end of February for resiliency hubs on the private side. Our community organization groups that are looking at doing some type of resiliency efforts, and we're keeping an awareness of those partnerships and capabilities and attending their events on doing a shared planning effort from that standpoint. They're all driven locally by those private entities, but we're partnering in at least planning and gaining awareness on the efforts underway.
Kevin, can you help me? And I attended that event, yeah, and I appreciate several of our staff were there. And one of the things that they really made a point was that resilience hubs, right, shouldn't be at schools. So like their idea of resilience hubs is, I think, different from what we were applying for in the hazard mitigation grant program, right? Because we were applying for hardening at schools. So can you kind of speak to the difference of what they were talking about resilience hubs were and how that worked versus, I guess, we were looking at these as more as, I don't know, emergency shelters. Can you speak to that, please?
And that's a good point. With regards to some of our wind hardening projects under the hazard mitigation grant program, we were putting funding request in for wind hardening backup power at schools, which then we would be looking at for shelters. We have some of our community centers that the county owns that we were looking at putting grant funding in for wind hardening, but then also that backup power and generation. And that would be more of the resiliency hub concept, leveraging those resources and facilities that could be used long-term. If we looked at the schools, it was more from that emergency, quick turnaround and not that prolonged use. That was kind of the separation between that. We're very much emergency response, sheltering capabilities, providing a safe location with capabilities for our community members. A community center is more of that prolonged capability for resources, power systems that can provide accessibility and communications to the community members. And to the point of the speaker from that day, that really kind of highlighting that year-round aspect of resiliency hubs and that capability to not just from disasters, but also our blue sky, our good weather days, to have that resource available. And I think that's one thing we're looking at and assessing as we're looking at the project. You know, is there an opportunity to partner with what we're learning with our community groups, where we may not be the driver of that conversation, but a community group may be leading that effort, and we can find ways to collaborate with them.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay, and now I'm going to switch over to Max for our preparedness action plan.
Sure. So, hello, Commissioners. My name is Max Tainter. If I don't know you, I'm with the County Strategy and Innovation Department, and I'm going to give you an update on the county's internal preparedness action plan. But before I jump into the projects and progress, I want to take a step back and just give a quick reminder of what this plan is and how it came to be. So after Tropical Storm Helene, the county asked for my colleague Heather Parkinson and I to conduct an after-action report assessment of how the county responded to Helene. And the main purpose of that kind of report is to review what were the successes of county operations, what were some of the challenges we had, and the recommendations that came out of those. So we had a lot of recommendations that we compiled and refined with the help of county administration through an impact effort matrix. And that led to the creation of 9 categories, of which you see 4 behind me, in front of me, 49 different projects and 220 different action items that live underneath those 49 projects. Then we took it a step further and we created a phased implementation priority approach for those, where we defined them as high priority, medium priority, and low priority. And we based that off of 2 factors. The first is kind of an order of operations. What needs to happen first for future projects to be successful? For example, we don't want to teach people about how to request logistical support from Buncombe County until we really shore up our standard operating guidelines associated with it. So kind of that first. And the second one is just impact. What's going to have the largest impact on our ability to be prepared moving forward? So what you see behind me are 4 of the categories that house all of the high-level projects and the percentages of completion for the past 7 months, because 7 months is when the preparedness action plan was approved by county administration. Now, I'm going to kind of give you a better picture of what each of these categories mean. So when you see 45% for EOC, Emergency Operations Center operations, you know what that means a little bit better. And I'll pause for any questions after each slide. So Emergency Operations Center is the foundation for how we respond to emergencies. It involves making sure we have an updated emergency operations plan, make sure we have resilient facilities associated with emergency response, updating our crisis communication plan, making sure we have coordinated partnerships, and it even looks at our policies and contracts associated with how we respond to these sort of emergencies. And you can see on the slide the high priority projects associated with that. All of the ones I listed were in that bullet pointed section, except for the implemented PACE model for IT infrastructure, just because I wanted to say what that was. A PACE model is basically like a backup to a backup to a backup to a backup to ensure that we don't lose our IT infrastructure. It's a primary, alternate, contingent, and emergent model to make sure that we maintain operations during an emergency. I'm happy to take any questions if you have specific questions about the progress of this category. Okay. The next category is EOC staffing. It's pretty self-explanatory. We want to make sure that we have staff assigned to roles through a comprehensive staffing plan, and we want to make sure that they're trained. And we want to make sure we have internal communications to support when we activate how we communicate with staff to get them to where they need to go. But what I really like about this category is there's an employee well-being goal associated with it to make sure that we're not burning our staff out associated with our response. But the high priority project in this category is the development of this staffing plan. Any questions? Okay. The next high-level priority category is public safety communications and 911. We want to make sure that we have a resilient infrastructure to our 911 operations. And just like IT, we're doing that through creation of a PACE model. And this not only impacts our ability to have backup to backup for our 911 centers, but it also involves establishing partnerships with other municipalities and counties for when call volume is too much, that we have backup support involved from other communities and establishing those connections and coordinating contracts. The final of the high-level priority categories is community resource support. Community resource support encompasses a lot of different aspects. One of them is our warehouse operations plan, our kind of main point of distribution for important water and food resources for the community, and how we get food and resources to our point of distribution, our pod sites, or our community care, CCS sites. But it also involves things like donation management and acceptance priorities, and volunteer management, and how we space out our volunteer workers. So the only high priority project in this category is the establishment of this warehouse operation plan.
I'm curious, so with all the different categories, are there any specific challenges that you're running into that's impeding progress? Or is there anything that you think we should be aware of that you're focused on out of all of these?
So the big challenge that we're having with a lot of this work is just limited staff. Staff in counties are working really hard on these. We have preparedness work groups that are going on where they meet monthly to update their EOP annexes, which is how they operate and what their roles are in an emergency, and creating job aids and standard operating guidelines. And emergency services is supporting this, and HR is supporting this, but emergency services can only do so much while still responding to emergencies. So we're hoping that these meetings are a great place where everyone can kind of gather and coordinate this work together. But there's a reason we also created this hierarchy with these priorities, and that we want to make sure that since this is extra work staff is doing, we want to be reasonable with their ability to do it in a timely manner. And we want to be able to have them kind of take ownership of how quickly it gets done. And some of this seems very simple, but it involves a lot of coordination and a lot of community partner work. So we're working through it. There's nothing that's a barrier that's keeping us from doing anything, but it's definitely moving along. And in 7 months, a lot of progress has been made.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Before you move on, I can't let that go without jumping in and saying, staff has been working hard. Max said it. And the challenge is staffing. And no matter how you look at it, we can't get this done as quickly as we would like. And so by the next hurricane season, which is June, all of this would not be in place. So we're working on it. We're trying to, in my mind, nickel and dime it, because we have to take it so slowly, because we don't have dedicated staff. They have a full-time 40-hour job already, and then we layer this on top of that. So I don't want anyone to leave here expecting that come June 30, when hurricane season starts, June 1st, when hurricane season starts, that we would remarkably have this all put together, all wonderfully planned out plan, because that is not the case. This is something that's going to take us years to build out based on the limited staffing that we do have. So thank you for that question.
Thank you for that input. Yeah. And obviously, thank you to all staff for doing this work on top of everything else that they're doing.
So the rest of the presentation just goes into, these are the medium level priorities. So something I forgot to mention at the beginning is the high priority items were supposed to start the work last year. The medium priorities started in the first quarter of this year, and the low priority items we're looking for staff to start in the second quarter of this calendar year. So with that said, these categories all encompass the medium priority items. I'm going to go over these very quickly also, but EOC logistics is basically how the county acquires, distributes, and keeps track of the resources that we get in an emergency. And part of this also includes cross-training with community organizations and municipalities and fire departments on accessing it in a more intuitive, coordinated way, because those were some issues that came out of the initial after action report. Family reunification is what it sounds like, but it involves more because what lives in this category is also the idea of a family assistance center model. So family reunification is, there were multiple departments doing family reunification, and there were multiple agencies doing family reunification, and there just wasn't a coordinated effort during the aftermath of Tropical Storm Helene. So it's the idea of how can we coordinate all of these reunification efforts and possibly house it in a family assistance center where people can come to find out where their loved ones are and get information and also get access to resources while they're there. And I do want to address why this is at 0% also. So coordination and conversations have begun with family reunification with HHS, who's the lead for most of the projects in this, and the Buncombe County Sheriff's Office, who's one of the support organizations, and emergency services. All of these conversations are happening, but we base the percentage of completion off of those action steps that I mentioned before, the 220. So while the work has started and the conversations have started, they haven't met the thresholds within those actions to showcase a percentage of improvement yet. Shelter operations is pretty simple. Our HHS has a pretty strong foundation with shelter operations, and they're the ones in charge of this. And it's because they have to do shelter operation planning on a yearly basis anyway, that they have to submit. But we want to enhance our shelter operations based on some of the specific issues we had during Tropical Storm Helene, and that was more looking at security for shelters, specific information about how we can support medical shelter operations, making sure we have staff expectations for shelter operations, and just resource support in general for these shelters. The non-emergency call center is the One Buncombe hotline that was activated during COVID-19 and Tropical Storm Helene. We want to take that into a year-round call operations center where people can ask questions about Buncombe County in general, and when an emergency happens, we can shift that over to emergency assistance support and resource coordination to help save the channels of 911 for actual emergencies where they can call us. So to do that, we have to make sure we have staff, a standard operating guideline, and we have to make sure we have access to this pool of community resources and keep it updated so when we activate, we're ready to go. And finally, we have damage assessment. And damage assessment operations are strong in Buncombe County. The only thing is we have damage assessment. FEMA has damage assessment. Other fire departments and municipalities will do damage assessment. So it's just about making sure we're all coordinated and not duplicating efforts with damage assessment, and trying to train staff about that coordination and how we act and how we progress in the assessment aspect of it. And the last point that I'll make is that all of these percentages will be available on a dashboard that will be public facing that we're going to update. It's not available right now, but it will be available soon. But happy to take any questions you all have about any of these items.
Other questions for Max?
It's good to see this progress. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Max.
Yeah, thanks, Max.
Okay, only a couple more slides and then we'll be wrapped up. One of the key things, we talked through the different focus areas for the recovery projects and the recovery plan. There's a couple foundational elements I just want to hit highlights on very quickly about FEMA public assistance, some of the grant programs, and an update on our Helene Resource Center. With that being said, we have 57 active projects with FEMA. 44 of these have been obligated, and we'll say these numbers are from a week ago, so there could be some changes as we're looking at these different programs. But right now, we're about $37 million for the county for reimbursements and upfront costs. And it's a fairly even split between where reimbursements fall and where upfront costs come in. And we've received about $15.4 million in the bank to the county from our partners at North Carolina Emergency Management, as the money's coming from FEMA to the state, and then it gets disseminated down to us. Current activities, we have 12 additional projects at about $2.8 million we're looking at. And one thing just to highlight, I believe everyone's aware, but the federal shutdown for the Department of Homeland Security has impacted slightly some of our operations. There's a focus on Category A and Category B, which is A is our debris projects, B is emergency protective measures. Anything in those categories we're still moving forward on. If it's permanent work though, which is categories C through G, which of course includes park projects, more facility projects, those are considered non-emergency, and those efforts are on hold right So our weekly meetings with our federal project delivery managers have been delayed until we see different progress coming from our federal partners, but we are still seeing movement. So there's still coordination, there's still efforts underway. So the shutdown may have some impacts, but our A and Bs are still moving forward, and we've had several awards come through since that initial shutdown has occurred as well. So we are seeing that ball move forward as we go through. And you can see on the side chart there a little bit of the breakdown of where that $37 million goes. I will also note that a little over $900,000 is for management costs. So that's towards the county team that is actually providing administration of the grant program, project worksheets. A lot of the efforts are getting funded back for those hours and efforts for administration.
So one quick question.
Oh,
So
of
out of
course.
the 37, so we have received the 15.4.
Right, so there's, once an obligation occurs, it then has to go to the state for their review, and then it comes down to us. So even though we've got an obligation, the money doesn't always trickle down immediately, but the 15.4 is actually in the bank.
Okay.
Yep,
And I was looking around, Matt's not here, but I think Matt shared out of the 15 that we received, 9 million is for reimbursement. So if you look on the slide, 18 million is what we spent upfront of county money. We've received about 9 million of that so far. The rest has been for that advance upfront, landslides and the other things that we have to do upfront to get. So
Okay.
that's the difference.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
several. And then very briefly, the hazard mitigation grant program. I know we talked about the 47 active parcels that are currently in the process of going through the appraisals and then going through the buyout program. Just want to highlight that we do have a group 3 and a group 4. And then we've got multiple groups in our elevation projects as well, in addition to a few other categories. But in total, we have over 400 applications in Buncombe County for this program that is being administered by the state, funded with our federal partners from FEMA. We are hoping to hear how that progresses moving forward. On group 3 would be next for over about 166 additional acquisitions. And then, of course, infrastructure. This is another component of the hazard mitigation grant program. These are the products we're putting in for wind hardening generators. Our applications are 22, and that totals about $76.8 million that we're seeking for the program. So if we receive those awards, that'll go towards infrastructure, go towards warning systems, other needs that we have directly related to our impacts from Helene. Getting to this point, we have made the announcement recently, and I'm sure most of you have heard, but our Helene Resource Center will be concluding operations at 94 Cox Avenue on Friday, March 27th. That will be our last day at that site for walk-in appointments. That's, of course, had our partners with Renew NC via our disaster case managers from North Carolina Emergency Management have all been using that facility. So we are demobilizing that site. But we are actually shifting to an appointment-based approach and providing that capability here at 200 College. On the second floor, we're working with our general services team to get some desks and other resources up there, but providing space for those different partner agencies to be able to have appointments with our community members here at this facility, and then also our hazard mitigation grant program. So if a property owner is going through an appraisal review, wants to meet with the project coordinator, we're providing that space appointment-based upstairs as well. It has been an incredible resource in the county. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but we've seen thousands of people served by that center. The One Buncombe Call Center that has been also a component of that as well. So I think that's been a true success for our community, for the HRC. Just highlighting for our community members, they can call the One Buncombe Call Center to schedule an appointment, or email our Helene Recovery at Buncombe NC email address, and then they can also work with their Renew representative or disaster case manager to actually get that information on available times. The goal, of course, is to be live with appointment-based scheduling on Monday, March 30th. So there won't be a lag in community support. We'll conclude at 5 p.m. Friday, have appointments available starting Monday morning the following week. I also want to highlight a partnership. When we talk about community partnerships, is our long-term recovery group. That is, once again, a network of nonprofits, churches, or faith-based organizations, other partners that have been working very diligently to support our community efforts. They are working on case management, looking at home repairs as well, supporting debris management operations, and really working to identify gaps in partnerships. They are one of many, many organizations out there that are supporting our efforts. I might skip ahead, that was a duplicate. But they've mobilized over 2,000 different community partners and different organizations. So far, they've dispersed $500,000 to storm impacted community members, and there's additional efforts underway. They have a website set up with an intake form, a phone number that people can call, and that is another resource that we're helping connect our community members with if there's an unmet need identified. And then next steps, we are continuing through our project development, focusing on those 31 framework projects and sub-projects, and we'll be coming back to y'all in June with another update for the progress and maybe a shorter presentation to not consume so much of y'all's time. But we appreciate the opportunity, and any additional questions, be happy to answer.
Kevin, what about the FEMA rental assistance? That was supposed to end at the end of March. Do we have an update? It did already end?
Yes, and actually I've got the press release right here, so happy to share that with y'all. As of the 12th, they have extended for another 6 months.
Okay.
So we are through the end of September. That program is active. There are some caveats, though, that I think we should just pay attention to, that there is for the temporary housing units, there is a rent associated with that in the months moving forward based on HUD fair market value. We're looking at all the details associated with that with the press release, but most importantly, that resource is continuing for the next 6 months.
Good news, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Are there other questions for Kevin or Max? All right, we
Thank you
really
all.
appreciate the
Thanks.
update, and please do not feel like they need to be shortened. This is really helpful information for us as we are out and about in the community. So thank you so much. We'll look forward to our next one. And I think it does have to be noted that there's a lot of significant progress that has been made toward our recovery. Fully aware of the extra responsibilities and duties that has put on all of the staff across the county. We truly appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we have our Deaverview Mountain property update with Allison Daines and Tim Love. Or just Allison? It has Tim's name on here.
Good afternoon, Allison.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to come talk with you about Deaverview Mountain acquisition. Very excited about the topic. Wanted to just start quickly to remind everyone that in 2023, SAHC, or Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy, came to the county with a request to secure funding for the acquisition of Deaverview Mountain. This picture shows, I'm sorry? Oh, is my icon not on?
My apologies. Sorry. See, you threw me off my mojo. This picture shows here the outline of the property, which is approximately 342 acres. You can see the red outline that comes down to that yellow piece there, which is the piece that is known as the non-easement. And we'll talk at this next slide. If you look at it, Deaverview Mountain, there'll be approximately 319 acres that would be put into conservation easement, with the additional being outside of that easement where we can do development, meaning mainly for entryway and essential amenities such as restrooms, viewing platforms, parking, and such. The property is in the Deaverview community. It is extremely accessible, only 5.2 miles from downtown Asheville, 7.5 miles from Leicester, and 7.9 miles from Candler. And it offers views from Pisgah Mountain to downtown Asheville and beyond. That person in the swing is a certain child that belongs to Assistant County Manager Tim Love. So to give you a brief history and kind of where we are and what brings me here to you today is, again, in April 2023, I came to the board with a request, and the board passed a resolution to explore creating a county park out of Deaverview Mountain. So in that quest for exploration, we worked with SAHC, who received Land and Water Fund grant funds for the acquisition in the amount of $4.5 million in August of 2023.
At that point, we decided to pursue an ORLUP grant, or an Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership grant, which could serve as a one-to-one match for that grant from the federal government. And then in May of 2024, you all allocated approximately $7.7 million of GO bond funds for the development of Beaver View Mountain, with a projection of what this mountain could become in terms of a public park. And we were very excited. In November of 2024, we submitted that long-awaited grant to the state to act as the matching funds. In July of 2025, we received a notification of the award of those public funds from the state for the $4.475 million, meaning that as a total combined, we had over $8 million with Southern Appalachian Highlands Conservancy to go towards the purchase of Beaver View Mountain. So here we are today, March of 2026, and there is a tentative date to be ready to acquire this property, knowing now that all of the funds from grant sources have been encumbered and could move forward with the purchase of the property. And so I am here today to talk to you in order to be able to move forward with that final acquisition, that we would need an approved resolution authorizing the purchase of Beaver View Mountain from the board.
Which means, commissioners, we would like for this to be added to your agenda at 5 o'clock for that actual approval of the resolution. So that would be a consent item. If you guys, yes, if you guys would approve to add it to the agenda.
Are there any questions for Allison or further discussion before we?
I just want to say thank you to staff and to our partners who've done a tremendous job on securing all that money to be able to make this purchase. And this is such a big win for our community, and they're very excited about it. So thank you to you, all of the staff, and the partners.
Thanks.
I'm very supportive, of course, of putting it on our consent agenda.
Do you have consensus to put it on consent? Okay, go ahead, Parker, I cut you off, I'm sorry. Okay.
Great, thank y'all very much.
Well,
Allison would not be here at 5 o'clock, so now's your chance to ask her any questions.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yes, I
if you
was
have
just
any
gonna say that.
questions about Beaver View Mountain, please let me know, because you will get Tim Love at that point.
And that's not even close to it. I'm just kidding.
Thank y'all very much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Allison.
Allison.
All right, we have an update on Cox and Ferry Road external funding. Jonathan Jones and Matt Card are joining us. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Matt Card with Community Development. So we're going to be talking about the Cox Avenue and Ferry Road projects. I'm going to be giving a quick kind of high-level update about those two projects, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Jones, who's going to talk about funding gap estimates, funding applications that are currently in play right now for City of Asheville CDBG-DR multifamily application, for the NCHFA LIHTC application, and kind of a combination of those DR funds and the LIHTC applications. So first, starting out with Cox Avenue. So here is the Cox Avenue site plan. This is something that you've seen before. Cox Avenue right now has an approved memorandum of understanding with our development partner, Harmony Housing. That was approved back in the beginning of December, so we're currently operating under that memorandum of understanding. The project right now is moving through the City of Asheville development review process. We went to TRC, the Technical Review Committee for City of Asheville, about 2 weeks ago, and it passed through the TRC. The next step is the Design Review Committee, which is going to be on this Thursday. And then after that, we're planning on going to the City of Asheville Planning and Zoning Commission at the beginning of April, and then after that, hopefully, City Council at the end of April. The process has been going very smooth, and we've got a lot of good feedback about this project. Oh, I keep on hitting the wrong button. All right, so taking a look at the proposed unit mix, just to remind you of kind of what this project entailed, it had 203 units. Obviously, all are 100% affordable units, 80% AMI or less. So it has a huge impact on downtown Asheville. Jeez. You need to take that call right now? So Ferry Road. Ferry Road, obviously another very high impact, ambitious project that would be great for our community. We're going to really talk about two different components of Ferry Road. We're going to talk about the family LIHTC component of it, and then we're going to talk about the senior LIHTC component. And that really ties into kind of the funding applications that Jonathan is going to go over. And this, of course, is the site plan that I'm sure you've seen before. Here are for specifically the family LIHTC part of the project. You have 200 units, and again, all 200 units being 100% affordable, 80% AMI or less. The senior LIHTC portion of the project, a little bit smaller, but 70 units, still high impact, and all 80% less AMI or less. I'm going to hand it over to Jonathan Jones now, unless there's any questions about Cox Avenue and Ferry Road at this time. If not, I'll hand it over to Jonathan.
Thank you very much. So looking at the projects, there is, as the RFP went out for both of them, there was an estimate for the county commitments to the projects, $9.8 million for Cox Avenue and $5 million for Ferry Road. And based on the project cost estimates for each of those, the additional funding gap that has been identified would be $17.1 million for Cox Avenue and $16.5 million for Ferry Road. Working with Harmony Housing and Urban Atlantic as the development partners, part of those memorandum understanding would be for them to secure the additional funding to make those projects happen. Part of the, there is an additional 21 million gap on the Ferry Road development that would cover the access and utility infrastructure. So looking at the funding application, the opportunities that are available right now, the two primary areas that the project are focusing on would be the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency's low-income housing tax credit application. So the pre-application process, the due date for that was January 23rd. So both Harmony Housing and Urban Atlantic met that deadline. That was followed by the CDBG-DR multifamily application. So the city of Asheville has a specific allocation of those CDBG-DR funds. One of the requirements to access the state CDBG-DR funds would be to submit an application to the city of Asheville first to make that request. The next step in the process after the preliminary applications are submitted for LIHTC credits would be for those projects to go through market studies and for the Housing Finance Agency to review those initial requests in terms of their site scores. And then the final application is due on May 15th. Drilling down just a little bit into the city of Asheville's multifamily application for CDBG-DR, the initial round of available funds for that program is $10 million. The maximum project award is also $10 million. City staff provided an update to the city's Housing and Community Development Committee just this morning, indicating the number of applications and the amount requested. So there were 13 applications received. 12 of them are eligible for consideration, and that total was $70.4 million for those $10 million funds available. In terms of next steps, the Housing and Community Development Committee will consider awards on April 7th, with City Council anticipated to make final decisions on April 14th. For those funds, the Cox Avenue project submitted a $10 million request, and Ferry Road, between the family and the senior request, submitted $13.5 million for CDBG DR from the city of Asheville. So that is one aspect of the CDBG DR process. The next would be the initial low-income housing tax credit application. That's going to be combined with the state's CDBG DR allocation. So one application will allow projects to apply for both sources. Just looking at the history of tax credit applications, really through the lens of the 4% application process, that is the 4% applications that both Cox and Ferry Road are applying for, considered non-competitive traditionally, as opposed to the 9% projects that are highly competitive. Looking back as far as 2022, you can see the top chart shows the number of preliminary applications submitted statewide compared to the awards for that particular year, and we've seen a dramatic increase. There are currently 56 preliminary applications across the state. The second part of the table shows the county applications. So in the past, the county has had at least one 4% project submit as part of the process and received one award each year. This year there are 16 competing or have applied for that 4% application. For context, the county has represented only single-digit percentage of those statewide applications, and for 2026, we are up to almost 30%. Taking a look at the 16 projects, 4% tax credit projects within Buncombe County that are applying for tax credits. The map here highlights where Cox Avenue is located downtown and the Ferry Road projects south of Asheville, but also the distribution of the remaining 4% tax credits and more than 2,000 units that are being proposed. In terms of the tax credit selection process, because of the high demand on those 4% tax credits, this will be the first year that North Carolina Housing Finance Agency will have to have more of a competitive process. Usually those are by right requests, but they will be following the sort of 9% application and competition criteria. So looking at the project design, the proposed affordability, access to amenities, those sort of things in the scoring criteria that make for a competitive 9% project will also apply to the 4% process. As I mentioned earlier, the QAP, or the state's qualified allocation plan that defines the rules for those tax credit applications, also includes the criteria for applying for CDBG DR. In that, they have identified 16 disaster impacted counties as eligible for CDBG DR. And one of the criteria for applying for tax credits is the project is also willing to accept CDBG DR. It's anticipated that there will be one CDBG DR award per county. If there are additional funds after that, there may be additional awards, but right now it would only be one per county at the first pass. The maximum loan amount for a 4% project is $15 million.
Quick question, on the 15 million, is that for just the LIHTC or the DR or the combination of both when you say maximum?
The maximum request for CDBG DR, so
Okay,
they could get tax credits.
Okay, thank you.
Included on top of that. So in terms of the available funding, the North Carolina Department of Commerce has allocated $60 million to the North Carolina Housing Finance Agency to award through the tax credit process. They are working to finalize that agreement. The CDBG DR funds would be available to both 4% and 9% projects, and we can take a look at that distribution here in a moment. And again, the award for CDBG DR would follow the same type of scoring criteria for 9% tax credit projects. We'll note, as indicated here on the slide, the Cox Avenue and Ferry Road projects are collectively requesting 50% of that $60 million CDBG DR allocation. I'll also say through the county's Affordable Housing Service Program, there are other projects that are seeking just as much from that limited pool of funding. Yes.
Sorry, quick question from like 4 slides ago. In what document would I go to read that a CDBG DR allocation from the state would only go to, there'd only be one per county? Where is that written?
So the rules for the CDBG DR allocation would have been published through their request for proposals or through their RFP process for the multifamily program.
Okay.
That would have been based on their CDBG DR action plan.
Okay.
And then there would be references to that in the qualified allocation plan that NCHFA publishes to inform the tax credit application process. So there's a couple of documents that are
That final NC Commerce document that then the QAP references.
that would be, yes, and that would also be included in the arrangement that is being, the agreement being established between the tax credit, the Housing Finance Agency and Department of Commerce. And then this table here provides more context for the applications that would be eligible for CDBG DR across the 16 counties and how those are distributed. There were no applications submitted for Madison or Yancey County. Buncombe County's 4% projects, those 16 projects represent about half of the request for 4% tax credits and CDBG DR, and about a quarter of the 9% projects that would also be eligible.
How competitive do we think, I guess at the state level, will these 4% applications be? Because I don't think that's ever happened before, right? Is that what you meant earlier?
Correct. This is the first time that they would be following a more competitive process for 9%. I mean, for 4%.
So there's a total bucket of money they have, right, per year, separate and apart from the congressional Helene allocation. So,
Right.
so. Just
At this point, we don't have any indication of what the total request of CDBG DR would be from those 32 4% projects. They have indicated which projects have applied for the tax credits, but not what their corresponding request for CDBG DR would be.
And on that competitive process with this 4%, so are they looking at it it is on competitively across the state? Or are they gonna narrow it down and say within Buncombe County, because you have these 32, we're gonna look at this and choose whatever they consider the top projects?
So if they're following the 9% tax credit competition, those are grouped into regions. So there's an east, west, and central region, and then Buncombe County is specifically part of a metro county category. So they would likely compete with other projects in that metro region, which we would be the only metro region in the 16 counties identified for CDBG DR.
Okay.
Question I've got, these are two excellent projects, but we know it's competitive, what we're going through. What's the backup plan if we don't get all the money that we're looking for? through this, where do we go for the rest of it?
I think
The
that's a-
missing, the gap that we'll have.
I think that is a great question, and part of the work that we would have to come together with the development partners, because part of our agreement, the memorandum of understanding with Harmony Housing and Urban Atlantic would be that they, as the developers, would be pursuing those funding sources to close the
Good.
gaps in the project.
Okay.
Above what we pledged. We pledged 9 million. and
Right, I
five-
know what
right.
we pledged, right.
So we will still have to fund those, and then the
Right,
development
I
partner.
understand that, but I want to make sure, thanks.
And when do we find out about these different buckets of potential funding?
So the typical tax credit application cycle, the May 15th deadline is when full applications are submitted, and then the Housing Finance Agency reviews those requests and makes their funding decisions in August. So it's usually August or September in that time frame. Given the high volume of applications, we can't guarantee the exact timeline for their decision.
And then the DR funding would also find out after that point as well.
We expect that would be announced at the same time as the tax credits.
Other questions?
And just so I can make sure, so the gap funding beyond what we have already said is the 17.1 million and 16.5. And then I also noticed on the, I think it's on the Ferry Road one with the asterisks there, we had set aside, I think, 5 million through the bond, through the affordable housing. Had we said that? I can't remember, but anyway, we had said 5 million. But it says here that we need, the cost of the new access road and utility infrastructure is gonna be more around 10 million.
Correct.
And then, so that additional, let's just say additional 5 million, that's not included in the 16.5 gap, or is that included in that gap?
Go back to that slide. I don't believe it was included in that gap. I think that was above and beyond. Yes,
Yes, it is, okay.
yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay.
Are there other questions?
So the only question I have is, so it seems, so Cox Avenue is a little bit further down the line, and is there a concern that we're competing against ourselves by having both of those in the application pool? Or is there any potential that Ferry Road would get funded and then Cox Avenue wouldn't?
There's always that
Yeah.
potential. but-
I mean, the city is looking at the city CDBG-DR funding right now, applications, and it includes Ferry Road and Cox Avenue. And they have $10 million, so they have to decide how to allocate that. So potentially, yes.
Okay.
And I think the other approach here would be the funding is available now, and without pursuing it, there's not a chance that it could be received.
Right, especially considering that we have to apply for Asheville's pot of funding before we can go elsewhere too, so we're kind of jumping that hurdle. Okay.
And I'm curious, within those two projects, right, from your experience of looking at these projects through the years, like, is one likely to score better than the other, or do you think it's just kind of up in the air which one?
I think with the scoring following a 9% competitive process, that's a little harder to pin down because it's new for 4% projects. But I would anticipate that we would have strongly scoring projects.
On
in-
both
in
of those?
On both of them.
Okay.
And if you recall, when Sarah Odia was going through this process, she was hoping to do a combination of 9 and 4 on Cox. So she already looked at the scoring for Cox as a 9%. So in my mind, that means the competitive scoring criteria, she applied to Cox already. We did not look at that as a Ferry Road, if I remember right. But still channeling Sarah, she thought our projects were very competitive.
Okay. That sounds promising.
Are there other questions? Okay. All right, thank you. Thank you both. Affordable Housing Subcommittee heard this presentation. Was that 2 weeks ago? Yes, so we wanted to bring it forward for everyone to be on the same page with, so had some great questions. We appreciate it. All right, we have one more agenda item, our 2022 general obligation bonds update with Rachel Sawyer.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. There will probably be fewer acronyms in this presentation. I am Rachel Sawyer, Strategic Partnerships Director. Usually, when you see me, we're here to talk about something granting or funding related, and that's true today. We're going to share an update about the bonds that were issued by voter or approved by voters in the referendum in 2022. And the focus of this update is the funding specifically. I appreciate, and I know we talked a little bit outside of the meeting about the need to consolidate some impact reporting. And so please know we are working on that. You saw a great example of the planning and community development staff tracking really specific and technical level impact information about our investments in affordable housing. You'll see another example of that this evening when the Ag and Land staff present with partners related to some land trust conservation easements that are coming on your regular agenda. What we have acknowledged is that there's an opportunity to consolidate both that impact and performance of projects at the organization-wide level. So one step toward that you'll notice if you go to our 2022 bonds website and click into the performance dashboard, it has more than only funding on there. We've got some work to do in the coming weeks to build out project descriptions and project statuses, and we hope to add some performance measures like units created, acres conserved, miles of trail developed, et cetera. So know that we're paying attention to that and it's coming. But today's conversation is most specifically related to how the allocations look to date and what some options are for remaining balances. So there were two bonds, affordable housing approved at 40 million and open space approved at 30 million. The goals for these bonds, the uses of funds are listed here. And you are well familiar, as you've seen this, as projects have been coming to you to allocate these investments toward projects. To date, 30 million of the 40 million has been allocated on the affordable housing side, and 22 of 30 has been allocated on the open space side. There's some information about, of those allocations, how much has been actually spent or expended versus how much is remaining either sitting on contracts or waiting for contracts to be executed as these projects each progress. And the unallocated balances are reflected there, meaning these are amounts that the Board of Commissioners has not yet voted to assign to a project. Before we get to the conversation about those unallocated balances, we did want to include a list of the projects that have received budget so far from the board. And a couple of notes here on affordable housing. One note is related to the lofts at Swannanoa. The Affordable Housing Committee is aware, as is the General Obligation Bond Oversight Committee, about the project being rescinded. However, that amount still sits on our books because the project has not been closed. So that will be coming to the board probably in the next month as we do project closeouts coming from the budget office to clean that up. So you will see Law Offset Swannanoa, that amount showing up as unallocated or available to allocate after that board action. Another note here that we got a question offline about is the budgets for admin and debt. In 2023, the Board of Commissioners approved over 1.8 million. It was 937,000-ish for each of the two bonds for administrative costs. You can see that the admin line is a smaller percentage of it. We were charging some personnel costs and associated costs like training and supplies early in the life of these bonds, and we are no longer charging any of those types of costs to admin. So the remaining admin budget sits on a debt issuance line. When we go to market for these general obligation bonds, we've got closing costs from attorney's fees, from the financial advisor, et cetera. So this gives us a place to charge those non-project specific bond management costs. Land conservation, this is also a list of the projects that have been approved by vote of the Board of Commissioners. The reason I'm being explicit about this body versus other boards and commissions that make votes is everything that lands here at the table for the Board of Commissioners to vote on has come through some recommendation process. The one that I left previously, these came through the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. On the land conservation side of the house, there's a couple of other boards and commissions at play. One of them is LCAB, the Land Conservation Advisory Board. They focus on the land trust allocations. The other one is Ag Advisory Board, and they focus on the soil and water conservations. And that's the group that has been making recommendations specific to AGZ. So you see the first one on there is called Agricultural Growth Zone Match. Buncombe County committed, thank you for catching Commissioner Wells, that typo, we committed 2.3 million north of that to provide match to bring these conservation easements online. And as that match is being applied to projects, it's getting reduced. So it's down to 1.7 million currently remaining, but that doesn't mean there aren't plans in the works. So the Ag Advisory Board in this case is the group that is coming up with a plan to assign that remaining 1.7 million with support from the Ag and Land staff, of course. 2 projects. Some of that money will go to the projects that have asterisks on this screen because they've already gotten some, and these projects will need additional amounts when it comes to the actual purchase, once we're solid on those, what those costs are going to look like. And there will probably be a couple of other projects that get added to this list through that AGZ match avenue. Recreation allocations. This is a mix of projects that have been essentially commissioner priorities, like Beaver View Mountain. Allison was in talking about that project earlier. I think she quoted what year that was earmarked essentially as a placeholder for the development of Beaver View Mountain after we acquire it. And some of these projects came through recommendations from the Passive Recreation Lands Subcommittee. Last November is when the Board of Commissioners approved those projects, and those are currently in the contracting phase. And we'll see several of them come online and even to completion within 2026. So some quick wins there, like Gateway Park and Haw Creek and Hominy Creek Greenways. remaining balances, so unallocated amounts, the factoring in of that 379,000 from Lofset Swannanoa leaves roughly $10 million left for affordable housing. We anticipate these recommendations coming to the board from the Affordable Housing Subcommittee. Potential additional funding for Cox Avenue and or Ferry Road, following on the heels of the presentation that we just had, talking about financing gaps. Also, Buncombe County was fortunate to receive a lot of proposals in the Affordable Housing Services Program this year, and certainly far exceeds the amount available. There's $16 million worth of requests through that process, so that could be another possibility that that members of that subcommittee and members of the board more generally look at for those remaining balances. On the open space side, it's not quite as clean because there's not just one committee or one board and commission that this flows through. However, we do know on that 7.7 million that's remaining, we do know a couple of things that are in the pipeline, if you will. One of them is Land Conservation Advisory Board requests for additional funding for those land trust conservation easements. The ag and land staff have about $2.2 million worth of projects that they would anticipate coming in as requests for this funding. 483,000 of which you'll see tonight and have a chance to vote on. There's another opportunity to get an additional grant for agricultural growth zone, which requires a county match. And so if that grant is awarded, we will know in summer, and we would anticipate coming and asking for an earmark. It's a good way to leverage and get more bang for the buck by spending these funds on a match. So if we took the 2.2 and the 2 million off the top, that would leave about $3.5 million remaining of open space. We've presented some options here. There's no need for action at this time, obviously, but do be thinking as the weeks and in the weeks and months ahead about where this particular remaining balance might fit into our funding pictures. We talked about existing projects. Beaverview Mountain and Ferry Road are two projects that these funds have already been assigned to that were essentially placeholders. They were based on calculations, best known information at the time, but as we get closer to kicking those off and get exact numbers, if there is an overage on the open space development for either of those two projects, that could be a possibility. We also have Helene recovery projects that we are trying to Kevin's presentation, mix all of these different funding sources to achieve what we hope. Owen Park is an example of one of those sites where we expect we'll have several acronym-based funding sources on the ground, whether it's emergency watershed protection and FEMA public assistance, potentially community development, block grants, or hazard mitigation. And also we're asking the community what they want to see, and we're talking about building back better. And there may be some desires and amenities that contribute to open space that are outside or beyond what those other known funding sources can cover. So that's a category of ways that we could spend the money. The third bullet is we are soon, in the next, I think, month or two, going to be in receipt of the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And that is not just county parks, it's inclusive of those open space properties Kevin was talking to you all about, those the buyout properties, which will have a need for activation or putting them into programming as open space that might have a financial aspect to them. It will also include greenway and trail development ideas and plans that these funds could potentially be leveraged toward. And finally, the board did receive a recommendation from the Passive Recreation Land Subcommittee last fall to do another open call for community grants. And so as community partners follow along, that is something that they'll be curious if that's going to be an option with any of these remaining funds. Finally, this is the last slide. The General Obligation Bond Oversight Committee was formed by the Board of Commissioners at or around the time that the referendum passed in 2022. And it's a 5-member committee with 4 members that are appointed by commissioners. Stephanie Lee is the banking representative, and Patricia Rosenberg is the accounting representative. Affordable housing is Joel Henderson, and Casey Gilbert is in the seat where it's appointed by the Chamber of Commerce. We have an open seat and have for some time. I'm not actually sure when the vacancy occurred, but we could use your help to spread the word to people who are representatives of the greenways or conservation community. There's a new application form, I guess, on buncomnc.gov that people can go to and fill out to be considered for appointment. And this group next meets next week on the 25th. And those meetings are open to the public and published on Buncombe County's public input website. Happy to answer any questions.
Is that vacancy posted on the boards and commissions? Okay.
It is.
It is, okay.
And we'll be engaging with communications and public engagement to see what kind of outreach or push we can do to promote the vacancy. But as you know, direct outreach is always a great way as well.
We can do that. Are there questions for Rachel?
Well, I'll share. I think all the options, first of all, thank you for the presentation, this update. It's very helpful to see all the information there together. And those options all look really good. And I'm curious, with what we were just presented from the affordable housing, I'm curious to hear from you all, well, everybody, but especially those of you serving on affordable housing. When we look at that potential, right, the amount of requests that you all have received, and then, and I know it's trying to weigh a lot because, right, we don't know exactly when we're going to find out, probably August or September. Sounds like maybe we'll find out some more around the Ferry Road and the Cox Avenue project. And I think in our minds, we had kind of said, oh, like that 9 million was kind of in our brains. We were kind of holding that for Cox. But I'm curious to hear from you all kind of with the pressing needs, like, you know, do you think we need to potentially go ahead and use some of that to get some of the projects going, or hold all that, especially with the fact that we are considering, right, putting bonds back on the ballot in November again. And even if we do that, there's no guarantee, of course, that they pass. But I'm curious with the needs that we know we have in our community. I'm sure y'all have talked about this some on the affordable housing committee.
So we received today the second of 3 rounds of presentations on the AHSP applications. We'll have our third 2 weeks from today at 1 p.m. and then we will have seen every application that has come forward for us. And then after March 31st, we will then be digging in with Matt and Jonathan and Matthew Cable from staff to really start looking at the hard decisions that are ahead of us. So at this point, I'm personally not comfortable saying what direction we're headed because we haven't seen the rest of the applications in a presentation form. But I do think that we can all agree that it's going to be a really difficult decision ahead of us, especially since we did put those applications out to those community organizations who are doing so much work in the affordable housing arena, that they've spent a lot of time working on those. To have to say, potentially, we may not fund any of them. I'm not comfortable saying that that's the direction that we're headed. I'm looking at my colleagues on affordable housing subcommittee as well.
And do y'all have any funding? I know in this budget, because we had such a hard budget season, I think we cut funding from
We
affordable housing.
agreed
So do you-
to relinquish our affordable housing funding in this budget because we did have bond funding available.
Right.
So that makes this an even harder situation ahead.
So there's not, you don't have any.
There isn't
Okay.
anything. The 9.9 is, I think that's right, is what's ahead of us, available to us.
Okay.
All I'll add, that was well put, is that we know we did add 2 citizen members to that committee, so that's, I think, why Chair Edwards doesn't want to get ahead of the committee, but I'll just say there's just not enough funding to do everything that needs to get done in the community, so there's just some really difficult decisions of how to utilize this funding, because it could all go towards Cox Avenue and Ferry Road, and it still wouldn't be enough. So we want to ensure that the partners that have stepped forward to put these proposals together receive our full consideration.
Well, thank you. That's helpful to have that additional
No,
context.
thanks for that question, and
That's a good
it's a
question.
good question. Are there others?
And so you're not looking for feedback from us today. This is more informational, and at some point in the future, you will want some guidance.
Accurate, there's no pending decisions to make except for the ones that are queued up, like tonight's allocation for open space.
Okay. Did you have?
All I was gonna say, we'll never have enough money. We're just gonna have to make the tough decisions.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. Rachel, thank you. This was really interesting and helpful information and updates, and will help push out the need for someone to serve on that commission as well, that board.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. All right, commissioners, are there any other items to discuss?
I just want to, because
Yes, Commissioner
I think I want to just make the point while we're on the topic that I think this is a good reminder for us to keep in mind ways that we can help promote market solutions to bring more housing that's affordable onto the market. And I think things like getting rid of single-family zoning is one thing that we've done to kind of, to consider that. So, we have to think broadly about how we can address this issue, not just with public dollars, but how can we, encourage developers to really bring on the affordable housing that we need.
No, I appreciate that point. I think we said that with our last presentation from Nate about ending single-family zoning, that we're light years ahead of others in the same situation as us. But we've just been ahead of it, but we need those folks to come in and help us meet that need. And engaging our residents across the county to help understand the need for more housing across our community. Thank you. Anything else, commissioners? All right, if not, do we have a motion to adjourn? All right, all in favor? All right, we are adjourned, and we will see everyone upstairs at 5 p.m.